And we're going to invite all of our other panelists to join us. Hello, hello. I can see all of them being added. Thank you. Hello, welcome. All of you wonderful panelists, expert speakers. Tony, you know everyone. Tony has been here with us the past half an hour. No need to introduce him. We've got Joe here. Joe, one of our wonderful ambassadors for PPM Workup platform, as well as Maitili. That's something I actually can touch on later on as we kind of move forward. But right now I'm going to say Joe Stoller. He's a senior director and a project manager at Mirati Therapeutics. So welcome, Joe. Hello.
Thank you. Hello.
We've got Kasa Nyegizo. He's the associate director, global project manager from AstraZeneca. Hello. I think hopefully he can hear us. Hello.
Hey there.
Hi, perfect. I think maybe there's a little bit of a delay.
So I can hear
you. Perfect. So welcome. And last but not least, we've got the lovely Maitili Dalvi, and she's the project and portfolio and alliance manager from 23andMe. Tony, welcome from Organon. So yes, this is actually going to be another panel discussion on resource management. And I think actually we are missing a piece. We're missing a piece. There should be a lovely Dave kind of joining us. So it seems like he is not here. Probably some work conflict, as he's the VP of Life Science PPM Practice from Planisware. So he's going to be excused for now. Never again afterwards. So please, if you'd like to start a panel discussion, and we'll see if we can catch him. I'm going to give you all a word, and if there is anything I can help you with, please let me know. I'm going to reach out and find Dave.
Well, actually, Dave was going to be our moderator, so
maybe
I'll take the mic. And we actually have a few slides to start off our panel discussion to kind of set the context and segue what Tony was talking about into a panel discussion that incorporates perspectives from other companies and from other experiences. So let me share my screen.
Perfect. I'm gonna give you the time, and I'm gonna find Dave in this virtual world. Let's please wish me luck, everyone.
Okay, and we already did introductions, so we'll skip through this part, and we'll get into a bit of a topics discussion. I'm not sure if you're seeing what I'm seeing. Okay, so what we wanted to talk about today is generally what is resource management, and Tony split it up, I think, nicely, but we'll get into a topic and talk about those pieces. When is resource management needed at your company? And he spoke about his company's new, but with a lot of legacy history behind it with Merck. And so when in your company's maturity model do you need resource management? Is resource management all or none? What are some of the considerations for resource management in pharma and medtech, and different from other industries maybe? What are some of the best practices for resource management in pharma and medtech? We got some of those highlights already from Tony. And then what are the additional considerations for talent management versus resource management? Talent management being the performance and recruitment of talent in the organization, as opposed to assigning those talent to projects. So with that, I'll take this down and we'll go back to our panel view. Okay, we should be back to just the four of us.
We are, yeah.
All right. So let me start with the first one. What is resource management? And
I just quickly wanted to interrupt. Actually, Dave is writing in our comment section that says that he's here. So I'm not sure if he's testing us to be one of the attendees, and then he's kind of put into this position. But hopefully, I did send him a link, and he should be here speaking with you shortly. So Dave, please check your email. We're here. We're waiting for you. And Joe, if you'd like to carry on, and we're gonna bring Dave here as well.
Cool. Thanks, Katie. So what is resource management? And Tony did a nice job of kind of breaking down some of the components of capacity planning versus demand management. And I also want to add in assignment or allocation, which is kind of that third piece. That's taking a person and putting it against a task. Capacity planning being you're looking at a future book of work and the activities that need to go on, and moving some of the headcount to to accommodate that demand, versus demand management, which is you have a book of work and you might move some of the tasks or the projects around in time to accommodate your fixed resource load. And then the third piece is the allocation, which is assigning the people to those resources. And we have Dave. All right.
I'm in the show. Hi, everyone.
All right. Welcome, Dave. So we were kicking off with what is resource management. So that's my piece. Matilde, I wanted to kick it over to you.
Yeah, so just putting everything together that you mentioned and Tony mentioned, I'll just give a very simple definition of resource management to get us started. So I would say, simply put, resource management is how you organize and allocate your resources to successfully deliver your business objectives. So that's the primary goal why we are doing resource management. And it's also about having not just the right number of people, but also people with the right skill sets and getting them to work on the right projects. So that's, again, the second goal that I would like to emphasize while we get started. And then just pulling all of this together, it's not just about having that granular resource allocation, but also being able to have an integrated big picture view of what are your organizational and portfolio needs. So like you defined, Joe, the demand, as well as how do you plan to meet those needs with your capacity. And then just before I end, I'll say that for resource management to successfully work, it needs to be proactive, not reactive. And I think that's like a good stage to get us started with the rest of the answers as well.
So Joe, do you want me to take over on a follow-up?
Yes, please, Dave.
So yeah, I agree with you, Matilde. And then I'd go to maybe to Ksenia. Given that definition, what's the value to the organization, right? Like, why do it? What are you trying to achieve or avoid?
Yeah, I think Matilde said it pretty well. It's a large topic, and it's pretty complex, right? It's from hiring, developing, and retaining your resources, and doing it right. It comes down to, for any organization to be competitive and to to have an edge. The biggest assets for any organization is your talent. And if we say, the talent or the resources are the most important assets that we have, we need to have a really good resource management processes to manage our best assets, right? So having a really good resource management, the benefits are being competitive, being more productive and efficient, and getting and avoiding a lot of waste and the talent and timing. And I think overall it's just being really productive and being competitive.
Yeah, exactly. Get those products to market faster, and in our case, the therapeutics that are going to help patients, help the world.
Exactly.
And I mean, Tony, you certainly went into this, so you've got like the great lead in, but that's maybe the long term. Are there short term individual project benefits to consider?
I think so, for sure. I mean, I know one of the ways that I think that I got into resource management was that, with projects of, we kind of went through a portfolio process where we picked the best, there's the fear of like, am I picking the right projects? And then you say, I've got this great list of projects that I've got to execute on. And then you realize that, like in the situation we were in, the resources were spread like peanut butter, and it was that bouncing from project to project to project, like little kids after a soccer ball. And so once we started kind of ring fencing resources and, properly deploying and making sure our projects were set up for success, things started clicking, and then leaders started to see the value of resource management to say, oh, wow, I can predict my work. I can feel comfortable that things are going to get done, as opposed to, maybe a little bit of a chaotic feel prior to that.
Yep, definitely. All right, well, Joe, I'll hand it over back to you. As the question is RM all or none? How do you sort of scale across the organization with different areas and functions to make it work for them?
It's interesting because I think every company needs a little bit of resource management at some level, but is it all or none? Do you have resource management or do you not? No, there's different levels of resource management. And I think there's actually a a scale of kind of resource management that the Resource Management Institute puts out, levels 1 through 5 of your maturity of that resource management capability. And I think, for my company, Mirati is a small company, and our resource management requirement right now is less than what a big company might need. For example, when I was at AstraZeneca, they have named resource put against certain demand with a defined algorithm that goes against it. And if it's a complex study, it gets a higher resource demand than a low complex study. At Mirati, we don't need all that right now. We're kind of setting our resource capabilities up with very broad swaths of resource requirement. And so we're only doing role-based resources. We're not doing named resources down to the individual. And we're picking just clinical studies where it's a very discrete work package. And so we're starting with that, and then we'll broaden that out to the other business as usual activities as we become more mature in our resource management capability and the needs of the organization. So is it all or none? Nope. I think there's different scales.
And what I would add on top of that is it can be different per function. So maybe in some organization, very often the ClinOps has a little higher level of maturity, and maybe they go down to the named resource, or maybe there's one department that really doesn't have the fungible resources, and so role planning doesn't work for them. So they need to go down to that individual named resource level, but you certainly wouldn't want to impose that on folks that aren't ready for it. So yeah, I agree with you there. And maybe I'll just transition to the next question already. Matilda, I know you're thinking about this, is when is RM appropriate for a company? Okay, we already talked about everyone's doing RM. Even if you aren't doing it, you're doing it, right? Because putting people to do work. But when is putting some more process, some more rigor, some more thought appropriate for so many folks here that are on the line that have smaller organizations that aren't the big dogs?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that RM is always appropriate for any organization. But obviously the level depends on like where your organization sits at. And so I can think of like 3 high level variables or factors that might come into play here as we decide how much RM to implement in a company. So the first one is obviously size of the company. I think this is on everybody's mind. Smaller companies have smaller portfolios. They also have fewer resources, in which case it doesn't make sense to have a very complicated tool to allocate those resources. And then at the same time, smaller companies have fewer funding as well. And so it's very important for those companies to be very nimble in how they mobilize their resources and reallocate at a very dynamic pace. And then I think the contrary view in terms of the bigger companies needing more sophisticated tools and platforms is, I think, quite straightforward coming in from there. But the other thing that I'll also add is that in addition to the size of the company, what also matters is where it sits in the growth cycle. And what I mean by that is that how steep does the growth curve of the company look like within the next 3 to 5 years? Is the company thinking of rapidly scaling up, or is it sitting at the 2 ends of the spectrum, being a very small early stage startup versus a mature big pharma? And so if a company is sitting there in the middle where they're thinking of rapidly scaling up, they need to employ not just short-term resource planning, but also long-term resource forecasting. So in terms of how many portfolio projects do you plan to have in the next 2 to 3 years versus 5 years, and even longer term if you're planning on continuing to scale up beyond 5 years? And then how do you plan on meeting that demand? So having not just immediate capacity planning, but long-term view of how much capacity do you need to add? And so I think that's also a very different way of thinking about resource management. The other thing that I'll also add, the third variable that I can think of right now, is what type of business you're in. So if you're in a pharmaceutical consulting or service-based industry, you need to be more careful about how you're allocating your resources. And in that case, even if you're a smaller company, you might need sophisticated tools because you need to make sure you're allocating the right skill sets on the projects at the right billing rate, because eventually that's how the budget is going to be rolled up for the client. And you need to meet that agreed budget that you set with your client, as well as the agreed timeline. So your resources need to be available for the short-term projects. So like these are the 3 variables that I could think of right now to your question.
Yeah, that last point that I know there are a few CRO CMOs here in our audience today, and right, the resource needs that they need, the organizations we work with, they go down to the named resource level much earlier, more often, more detailed than typically biotech, med device, and pharma organizations need to do, because they do need that precise management. I agree. But Tony, I mean, you talked about it, but starting up a new organization, here we are. When is RM needed? Is it needed day one? And you've laid out a bit of a maturity curve there, but maybe you can talk about where, maybe reiterate a little bit of how that maturity curve is evolving, of how you are building the RM capabilities.
Yeah, the one thing that I don't know if I mentioned, but one of the, I'll say, the constraints that we had was there was a certain part of the budget that was already fixed for us. So me coming in February of 2021 and saying, hey, we need 20 more resources for this, it probably wouldn't have done anything anyway. So I kind of knew that, like, let's not try, we have a little bit of time to be able to really plan. And that's where, again, just we took those early days when we were just kind of incubating and getting to know each other, of just starting to tease out what was going on in the organization. What are we seeing? What are the types of things, what are those things that are driving our demand that maybe were a little bit higher than the assumptions? And we started to, it was nice because, having those conversations, not algorithm based, not really data driven, just trusting our leaders and based on their observations. But then we were able to feed that and tell a pretty nice story as to why we truly did need additional resources. So again, not with a data backup, but back to your question though, in terms of that maturity curve. So one could say somebody did resource management before I even got there, because the organization had a size. Group X was A and Group Y was B sized, and somebody did that based on a number of assumptions. So we had a baseline. I was kind of picking up from that baseline, and now and then it started to need to get a little bit more mature, and I'm sure that moving forward, there's going to be, I'll say, less tolerance for the qualitative piece, and we're going to need to continue to try to drive to the quantitative support of our needs.
Yep. I'm going to bring another vantage point. Sometimes we talk to the emerging companies, super high growth, and when we say, what are your needs in the greater PPM sphere? And very often resource management's up there, but sometimes the answer is definitely not resource management. If we need people, we just go get them. We've got the early stage funding. We're fine to grow. But even those organizations, as you say, they are doing resource management to some degree, and they do need to have the right people working on the right programs. But I always kind of chuckle at that. And then in our case, if they implement the project side, maybe it's cost tracking at first, maybe it's integrating with finance. Resource management always comes. Maybe it's a year down the road, maybe it's 3 years down the road, but they always need to have something more mature and increase that data quality and compliance. So let's go to consider life science, consider some different considerations. Ksenia, can you talk about what you've seen, as resource management theoretical, but what's maybe more specific about life science that they would need to consider?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think for the life science, from what I've seen, at least in the organizations I've been in, mostly AZ, is you got kind of specific kind of talents that you need in your organization in different stages in the science, and we've kind of did a lot of the work around the capacity. Understanding the capacity of each function, and the demand, in terms of the demand, what kind of molecules we're developing, what kind of market, and understanding the whole product, understanding the product of that we were trying to develop, and those products that we were developing, these specific talents that we need to retain. So understanding the capacity, and comparing with the demand that we have, and it's really fast paced, so kind of matching that has been kind of a key for at least for the life science industry. So kind of understanding the capacity, and continuously reviewing our demand and matching those two, and being kind of more efficient in that regard.
Can I touch on that too? Yeah, to add to what Kasani is saying. In life sciences, we might have different definitions of a work package, a project, a program, a portfolio, and that kind of defines where our resource management capabilities might, the maturity of our resource management might come into play. Say, for example, we define a work package as a clinical trial. That's a, sometimes 3 to 5 year project. And when you're assigning resources to it, do they have the same amount of demand over that 3 to 5 years? Say you're considering biostats, they might have a heavy requirement early on when you're setting up the study. Then they kind of go in relaxed mode, and then at the end, when it's time to analyze the data, they're back on the hot seat. So it's different. I think life sciences is different within clinical trials versus even CMC, where there's a constant kind of manufacturing run that's going, and people there might be applied at a constant rate. So those are some of the nuances that I think that have challenged me when I've been building the resource management capability. And I want to hear from some of the others. Has that resonated with you as you've tried to apply resources to discrete work packages?
Yeah, I would say that's certainly the biggest challenge in the pharma industry. Like you nicely put it, like the work packages vary based on the phase. And in an ideal world, it would be nice to have some sort of templates or algorithms that would help you fit that. But at the same time, it's not a box kind of fitting. And so you need to continue to modify the resource allocations as your program advances. So I think there's an easy answer of saying that you can use templates, but at the same time, you all know that even using templates, you need to continuously tailor and modify them to fit your needs. So certainly a biggest challenge. And the other thing that I'll add here is that another challenge that's on the top of my mind is the aspect of multi-project resource planning. And what I mean by that is like most of our projects have resources that are shared between the different programs. And so it gets all the more complicated because if there are some shifts or delays on one program, there's a ripple effect where those shifts can then translate to other projects in the portfolio. And I think that's something that all of us are trying to tackle in terms of how do you avoid those major delays that would impact the other projects based on the dependencies that exist.
Or I'll add, or at least have the visibility to it. So if that delay happens, to be able to react quickly to say, here's what's going to be impacted elsewhere, and be able to make some quick prioritization decisions rather than, have that impact only be aware when it bubbles up. Oh, wait, now we don't have so-and-so, we thought we did. So that's where having structure in your process and having the data and providing the tool to be able to see that impact is, I think, a big value generator to the investment in resource management.
Exactly, being proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah.
Coming back to that point, yeah.
Now I'll bring up Dr. Bainey's question now because it does fit into this too. You do the best planning in the world, and yeah, things don't hit when you do plan for it. So since we always know things take longer than planned, do you guys put uncertainty into your resource planning?
So I can touch on that. We have built in a kind of a 10% buffer on our resources. We'll say that for each role, there might be 8 people, but there's a 10% buffer plus or minus. And that kind of accounts for like surprise activities that come up that might take some of the demand. And it also might account for something might have happened faster or more efficiently than we expected. So it was less demand than we actually expected. So there's a little bit of some of that uncertainty built into that 10% buffer.
I think for us, because we're so new at this stage and we're frankly not at that level of maturity where we have such details to be able to do it, we're kind of capturing things, as I said, rudimentary at a high level. So it's almost like baked in there is a little bit of contingency in that wiggle room. As opposed to being ultra, when I think back to my engineering days where, yeah, we'd kind of bake the contingencies into the different parts of the schedules and the resource plans. This is very different. This is a high level. So it's inherently squishy within, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think for me, what I've seen, one way to tackle that risk is, yes, you can do really nice planning, but things change through time. So, but if you have a process to assess the demand and capacity regularly, so if you have a process, each function will. That's what one of the things that we do. On a monthly basis, but for different companies, it could be like shorter or longer, but having a continuous process to look through your capacity of the team, the skills and the demand, and escalate as needed. So that I think that continuous check and reassessment would probably help mitigate that risk.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll quickly say that we don't build in that 10% buffer that Joe, you were describing earlier, because we always strap for resources, and we always don't have enough resources to fit the demand, at least in our situation. And so it's hard to have that luxury to put that buffer in. But also the expectation is that because your portfolio is so dynamic, there'll be additions, but also terminations that might happen because of the natural attrition rate that exists for each of the phases in our development cycle. And so the hope is that it would all balance out. Even if one program overutilizes resources, it might, some resources might get freed up from a terminated project.
That's what I was going to add. I see many of our customers putting in the probability of success PTRS at least by phase, and sometimes even more granular, but at least by phase, to be able to attenuate the demand over time. And when you roll up across the portfolio to get something a little more realistic, noting that not everything happens. Another question here about the tools, and we were going to get to that too. But what tools do you guys use for resource planning? I'll say at Planisware, we use Planisware for our own resource planning, if that surprises you.
So I'll fess up at the beginning. We're still so early that we're in Excel. And if you, again, in the context of the portfolio still being established and not just within the research division, but kind of everywhere. So, we purposely kind of held off picking sort of platforms and softwares and things like that. And at this, with our level of maturity, Excel is working. I mean, I'm very anxious to get out of it and get into an actual tool, but I kind of have to wait for, the other things to gel a little bit more within the company before we can, feel comfortable moving forward with some sort of tool.
Yeah, I'll say that we are also using Excel spreadsheets at the moment, but we have realized the need to transition past that. And so currently where our organization and our portfolio sits, we are trying to evaluate different tools. And I think Dave is familiar with that because we had a recent conversation on that front. But yeah, we've put together a list of criteria that would be fit for purpose for our size of organization and what we need today, but also something that could easily scale up as we grow. And so we are looking at 4 or 5 different tools and trying to see what fits best for us.
We're currently using Project Online, and the output, we have a dashboard built in Power BI, and that Power BI output is what the rest of the organization sees. So our functions, when they want to go see their resource demand over time, they would go to Power BI. The Project Online part, that's just what the project managers see, and that's where we put all of our inputs. And so far that's working okay. I think some of the functions are reluctant to go into a dashboard, and there's some question about the integrity of the data and all that. And so it's, we're building on this kind of maturity with the organization as we go through it.
Dave, for us, we use Planet.
And Planet's the
Planet is Planisware.
Yeah, Planet is internally branded name for Planisware. Yeah.
Planisware, yeah.
So Joe, I wanted to get back to something you said about that 10% buffer, and it was a little bit to handle uncertainty. But something that I see different in life science versus, say, I don't know, an automotive organization like Ford, who uses Planisware for resource management. The engineers are working on what they're doing, right? They're building the powertrain, that's all they do. But I feel like in life science, something that might be unique for some industries is the non-project work that needs to happen. Regulatory changes that you need to prepare for, or cross-project work. And maybe you guys can speak to that. I mean, I see organizations, use the 10% buffer for that sort of thing. But on the other hand, I see organizations really, hey, let's plan it. Let's make that visible. Let's make it transparent. So maybe I'll turn to you, Tony. Is that something that you're considering? I mean, you mentioned a little bit, but is that something you're considering being more process heavy and intentional about tracking?
You're talking non-project work, Dave?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of what we do. If you think about 60 mature products that have been out there in 140 markets, one of the things that I never appreciated until I came into a regulatory, doing this for a regulatory organization, is that, oh my gosh, there's this project that may seem boring and is 15 years old. There's a ton of work still to maintain it, just monitoring the safety and keeping the license up to date, and all those updates that have to occur over time. So we absolutely have to manage I would say a lot more of our work. I'm going to guess 60 to 70% of our work right now is non-project work. It's that keep the lights on, keep things maintained type work. So we could just do a flat bar and say, let's just put it down at, that's 15 FTEs and we're just going to hold it flat. We will try to get more mature and understand what those things are, because if we just, we know that if we just see one line item on there that kind of represents a lot of stuff, then it doesn't really provide value. And the other thing that we can do is, to your point of, there are a lot of regulatory changes. As we went through and said, what are our changing needs? There was a lot of reference to, boy, this country now has a lot higher expectations for regulatory, and it's going to need to double in this country to be able to support that. So we need to be able to plan and represent that dynamic aspect of our work.
And yes, Matilli, I can imagine on the leaner organizations, people are over demand because there's always non-project work. There's always so many things that have to happen. Is that part of the challenge? And do you have any ideas of how to track that when you are just trying to get up and running with it?
Yeah, that's certainly part of the challenge. So I think one best practice is to allocate or call a dummy project as non-project work or overhead, and put that as a bar within your allocation, however you're doing those allocations, be it in spreadsheets or a sophisticated software. And so when you allocate your resources, you need to be cognizant of the fact that they won't be available 100% of the time to contribute to project work. And that way, once you have that dummy project in there, you can allocate each of your resources, whatever percentage makes most sense on an individual level basis. But at the same time, you could also use a generalization. And I think what I've used recently is 80% project work, 20% non-project work, accounting for all the other overhead or administrative type of tasks. But I think that percentage could certainly vary based on the organization and what the individual's actually doing.
Or based on the function.
Right,
Where
exactly.
CMC might have a lot less project work, as someone else mentioned, versus ClinOps. So you can really track that per group. One hint I really appreciated from an organization that was sort of struggling is one of the things you mentioned, Tony, in the previous call about the psychological safety of groups wanting to sort of hide a little bit. Instead of calling it non-project work and instead of having some just catch-all, they called it portfolio enablement work.
Yeah, we use that term.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if it enables a portfolio, it's got to happen. You can't have someone say, you don't need to do that. Yeah. Okay, so we have touched a little bit on algorithms. Joe, you've used them before. Ksenia, you're certainly using them now. Do either one of you want to speak to the benefits and challenges of the algorithms? And then I'm going to get to Patty's question as a follow-up to that.
So I'll start with our immature algorithms right now. They're basically for each role within each function, how many headcount do you expect you need during study startup, study conduct, study closeout? Do you need 1.5? Do you need 0.75? Do you need 0.2? That's the maturity of our algorithm. Then you add those up across all of your studies, and it seems to be smoothing out pretty well. I'll say we've gotten a little bit more granular. We've created a small study, medium study, large study, and we kind of interpreted that to be like a phase 1, first in human. Could have been a small study, but in oncology, often they turn into big studies. You get these multi-cohort, potentially registration enabling studies that end up being 300 to 400 patients and global. And so now we went away from a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and into small, medium, and large. So that's the extent of our algorithms. Yeah,
I think for us, we try to develop it through time and it's kind of a continuous improvement, and through time it gets better. There's a central group who's organizing that effort per project type, loading those projects with using algorithm. And when we start a project, they would suggest which kind of project template or algorithm would fit, and you would take that and add some expert judgment, because that's just a suggestion, right? And make it better. And then with actuals, you get the feedback, and through time it gets better. But it's a really good starting point. And as the organization matures and those algorithms improve, then it would be much better input to get to the kind of a good working template.
And just to add on or highlight, one of the things you said is that expert guidance. So an algorithm is, we view it, I mean, many organizations that use Planner use algorithms, and we advise it is a starting point. It centralizes assumptions. It allows you to have the conversation ahead of time without the emotion of this project versus that project, of what it typically takes. So that way, when you get into the heat of the room, you can say, no, but we previously agreed you thought it'd be this. Okay, if it's something different, explain why. The expert judgment's okay, but let's be intentional about that. Let's track it. Let's put a qualification behind it. This is different because of X opposed to our normal. And it kind of brings the heat down. We hope we understand it in making those judgments. So, but as you said, it's the algorithms, or I think, Joe, you said the algorithms average out over time across your portfolio. Yeah, some might be a little over, some might be a little under. That's another thing with the algorithms. Don't aim for 100%, because you won't quite get there. You'll have 100 different drivers the PMs need to keep track if you're trying to get 100%. But if you have high level, in Joe's case, it's just the study type and the 3 different phases, you can already get a good rough estimate. So now to Patty's question, that could work on the aggregate, but how do you deal with, in real life, an individual project, that is only 80%. In real life, you do have more variance, and you get down into, next month, next quarter, even next year, I actually do need something different. So can someone speak to the long range planning versus the short term planning, and how to balance those in I mean, whether you use the algorithms, but just in your planning? Long range planning is often for finance, for making portfolio decisions. Short range planning for executing this project.
So a little bit more, I'm going to go back to my previous experience and maybe a little bit more mature, where we were doing this in a more detailed way. In those cases, there was, as you said, Dave, like, it's almost like that broad resource management person had responsibility to feed these things into finance and make sure that our budget enabled and allowed the hiring of resources down the road, and address things kind of proactively. But there was also an element of that project management where they would bubble it, like in the case I'm thinking, when a project would be in trouble. Let's just say that something took longer, takes more, something hit the wall, and we need more resources quickly. They would need to escalate that up through the portfolio governance process, and then that's where the holistic horse trading would be. We'd kind of take a look across and say, well, look, can we borrow from this project? What do we need to redeploy and everything? So, but the bottom line is, something like that would actually feed into more of a portfolio governance process for us. That was at least my previous experience.
Yeah, I would agree that it definitely flows into portfolio governance to manage the short-term allocations, at least. And this reminds me of the points that are nicely described in the PMBOK guide, where you have to do resource leveling as well as resource smoothing when you're looking at the short-term resource allocation. And so looking at your projects at any given snapshot in time, trying to see if you do mobilize some resources from other projects, is it going to impact the timeline for that other project? And if there's no impact, maybe that's an easier decision to temporarily allocate resources to the project that needs it most. And so employing those principles of resource leveling, but also resource scheduling, smoothing, and in terms of looking at the schedule constraints, trying to see if it's going to impact your critical path or not, I think is one way of addressing the short-term needs.
Great. I'll go to the next question. But thanks, Patty, for that good question. So this is from Andrew, who also liked the question from Patty. But he asks, how does a resource capacity management plans connect to corporate long-range planning?
So I think it has to be two ways. I mean, for us, we take we say like a sharpened pencil view for 1 to 2 years out so that we can feed into budgets. But there's also the kind of crystal ball planning where you're looking 3 to 5 years out so that it goes into the long range operating plan. But in order to do that well, you kind of need to get some feedback and some advance notice from, again, it goes back to that understanding your demand sources and, hey, what are we thinking of long-term corporate? Are we going to be building a new capability? Are we going into a new therapeutic area? Because you'd need to take that as an input into so that you can understand, how your demand is going to change in the future. So I think it's, really a two-way street.
I agree with that, Tony. So the long-term planning comes with that kind of the corporate strategy or long-term kind of scorecard of the company, looking to 1 to 3 years, right? So when we do resource management or demand management, balancing out the capacity and the demand. You have a short term, right? What's happening now, and then midterm, maybe a few months, and then long term, 1 to 3 years or longer. That's tied to the corporate strategy, corporate planning as well. So it's kind of, as Tony said, it has to be linked together and move together with that.
And I want to add to that, the LRP at a lot of the companies I've been at has been driven by finance, and finance will set an initial set of assumptions, and project management often kind of challenges those assumptions, like, which study is going to run at what time. And these are looking out, 3 to 5 year durations. And so I think there's an interesting and good tension between project management and finance in setting those set of assumptions. And once it's agreed upon, you lock it down and you make sure that every function is resourcing against that same set of assumptions, right or wrong. If your assumptions are a few quarters off, that's okay, as long as everyone is using the same set of assumptions to put their resources and their budget against. Then as you get up to it, 2 years, 3 years, you're fine tuning and you're improving on your accuracy as you get in closer to it. So we only do long range planning for our resource capacity management right now. We're only looking long term. If we look short term, we would be grossly inaccurate. So that's just a small company kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, saying that I was recently involved in a long range planning exercise that I presented to our leadership team. And so I was looking at what a portfolio would look like 4 or 5 years from now. So in 2025 versus 2030. And so instead of starting with finance or starting with the financial constraints, I started with mapping out the portfolio in terms of what we are expecting and how does that match with the strategy. So I laid out 3 scenarios. There was an optimistic scenario, a likely or medium case scenario, and a pessimistic scenario for the portfolio. And then using certain benchmarks or generics that our finance uses, I rolled all of that information up to see what our capacity would look like for each of those 3 scenarios. And so working very closely, collaborating with finance, we were able to map out 3 different capacity levels to present to the executives and help them make that decision.
That's awesome to hear. I mean, I think that's the fundamental connection to the long range plan. Yeah. And then you have something you can go back to your functions and say, okay, well, this is what you're getting, and it's got to align to that strategy. Now make it happen. We have maybe 30 seconds left. The last topic was about talent retention or development through resource management. Does anyone want to give one real world snippet of advice that you've seen where good resource management leads to retention?
I can give one on the opposite, which is when resource management goes wrong and you burn people out and you don't have enough people to do the work. And I think that's where project management and resource management comes into play with HR and mapping out resources that are going to be needed.
Yeah, and just quickly, I'll add the other side of that. So people were asking about the time tracking. That's one of the things that we try to do is we have heat maps of people to show who is consistently overly utilized, because it is an early warning signal to the managers to hopefully say, maybe proactively address some of that to hopefully, retain your important talent.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think to add to that, matching the right skills to the right project, that also makes a lot of difference to keeping your talents and make them challenged and also motivated to on what they're doing.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. I'm back with you. Dave was incredible. Saying, we've got 30 seconds. I'm like, well, actually, that's my job. So, Dave, you're hired as well. But actually, I really wanted to say what a pleasure and honor it is to witness so many incredible professionals and experts from the field being here together like this, even virtually, still, being able to create such a beautiful vibe and energy and to give so much value to all the attendees and everyone really who is connected with us right now. So I'd like to say thank you to Joe, Tony, Cass, Maithili, and Dave. Also, I'll mention and I'll give a shout out to Planisware, which is actually one of our other sponsors for this wonderful event. So thank you, Dave. You're actually representing Planisware for this conference. And Planisware and also all of our other sponsors of our expo booth. So please feel free to go there, chat with them, see what they have to say, challenge them with questions, ask them anything you've got happening. And actually, this was a 45-minute long, or very short actually to me, it seemed like, a wonderful conversation panel discussion on resource management. And we're going to take a little bit of a break for half an hour, and we're going to come back strong for the last four parts of today before actually kind of going to bed and doing our own thing, trying to soak it all up. So use this time to rest, do anything you'd like, come and join PPM Workout community. I'll just briefly mention, as I said, Joe and Maithili, they're some of our ambassadors, and we've got way more lovely people who are actually trying to bring the platform to life and trying to bring you all there as well. So go and check it out, ask questions. There are expo booths, there is the networking tool, which is kind of like a dating app for PPM professionals. So go and join. And if there is anything, please do contact me. And I'm very excited to see what's going to happen for all the other panel discussions and keynotes. So please join us. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. And thank you to all of our lovely, beautiful panelists. It's always a pleasure.